Hey, welcome to Justice and Judgment, sponsored by Psalms 89:14 Ministries. I'm Chris Leonard. I am deep in my bunker in an undisclosed location. Hey, listen, I had an interview set up to do on Saturday, July the 8th, with retired Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis. And Bob emailed me this morning on July the 4th, of all days, on a holiday, and said, "Hey, I got some time this morning." So I moved some things around, and the interview went about 25 minutes. I thought it went well. I got some good information from him that I wanted to be able to share with you. And we had some issues with Skype and the buffering, but please bear with us. But I think that you'll enjoy the interview. I think that there'll be some wisdom, some knowledge, some information, some understanding about where we are in this nation with this current administration, where we are maybe in the end times events. So enjoy. Thank you. God bless, and we will see you soon. Hello, and welcome to Justice and Judgment, sponsored by Psalms 89:14 Ministries. Today we have a special guest, retired Lieutenant Colonel. We are going to talk about Russia and China today, and want to get Bob's perspective on where we're at, how close we may or may not be to war, what are the signs that we may need to be looking for. So, Bob, I want to thank you for being here, being my guest today. Um, it's good to see you and finally meet you. The reason I wanted to speak with you is, and I think I told you in my email, one day in my prayer time, the question was posed to me, who worse than the left does not want to see Donald Trump in office? And the thought came to me, Russia and China. And I heard you say that on, I think it was Skywatch TV. And then I heard Seb Gorka say that in an interview. And I thought, that's confirmation to me. So could you comment on that?
Sure, I'll be glad to, Chris. It seems to me that Mr. Trump, when he was president, was unpredictable, which is something that bothers the likes of Xi Jinping, the president, chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, and also President Vladimir Putin, who, as you recall, in both of those cases, China and Russia were not major threats at the time of the Trump administration, though they had, great capability. They were somewhat reserved, just because of the unpredictability, I think, of Mr. Trump. And of course, we had a robust economy, not like what we have today. We had a rising military capability. One today, of course, is diminished. And so, given what's gone on over the last couple of years under the Biden administration, and Mr. Biden, of course, to both President Xi and President Putin, is a weak leader. He has diminished the importance and the strategic value and threat posed by the United States. And as a result, I see that we're far more vulnerable today than we were under the Trump administration. So I think it's just a pragmatic view of what's going on geopolitically in the world.
I agree 100%. And I'd like to kind of pose another hypothetical situation. We see Mr. Biden apparently in a diminished state. And you and I probably both have had family members, friends that have had possibly dementia or Alzheimer's. And there comes a time when that rapidly becomes worse and worse. And alongside with the Hunter Biden revelations that have seemed to be taking traction in at least the right wing news of possible bribery and things like that, do you see it's possible that within the next, and I'm just throwing numbers, 3-6 months, that either because of his health state or the accusations, that we could see a administrative change or at least a presidential change, and that would put Kamala Harris in office. And would that put us in even weaker state?
Well, there's no question that Ms. Harris is, in my opinion, unqualified to be the president of the United States. And yet, you're right, Chris. The diminished cognitive state of Mr. Biden is very disconcerting. Yes, as you and others, I've seen my own family over the years decline in their cognitive ability as they advance in age. And so I'm very concerned about, Mr. Biden. He insists he's going to run for president and he's announced his campaign. And yet, there's no guarantee that he will be able to fulfill his obligations as president. Long ago, I called for the Congress to exercise the 25th Amendment, and that is that they would remove a president from office due to incompetence and a variety of other possible outcomes. Now, when you saddle that with what I think is very clear corruption among the Biden family with regard to Hunter Biden and the like, then you really see that, the United States is hamstrung with a president and his family that unfortunately have weakened, not only our image, our reputation, but also the real power of the United States around the world. And that has, of course, invited miscreants like the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, North Koreans, and others to advance their particular agenda at our expense.
I agree wholeheartedly. It doesn't take a prophet or anybody like that to see that, like you said, it's very pragmatic. You can see really the writing on the wall, and the weakened state of this country and the lack of respect. Especially, and I saw you in an interview on Fox News, and I'd like to talk about it. This listening base that China has set up in Cuba. I mean, 90 miles off our coast. We had, back in the Cuban Missile Crisis, I think I was probably 2 or 3 years old at the time, but that really set this nation back on its heels. And so are we inching towards another situation like that, because China is not only in Cuba, but they've been building bases all around the world with other countries, kind of just pushing their way in. And you, as a military strategist, I'm kind of curious of your opinion on that.
Yeah. Certainly in 1962, we had a deadly confrontation with the Soviets over their placement of nuclear-tipped missiles in Cuba. Since that time, of course, the Russians have diminished their footprint in Cuba, although I believe they're increasing it even now in a espionage base in a town south of Havana called Lourdes. They're probably rebuilding. Now, for a number of years now, the Chinese have had a presence themselves in what's called Beijing, which is a surveillance installation not far from Havana as well. And yet it's rumored, reported at this point, that they're bolstering that capability and using it as a center of intelligence gathering against U.S. installations in the southeast of the United States. What used to be Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, certainly the SOCOM headquarters in Tampa, a variety of other facilities all over the southeast. So they're using their eavesdropping technologies to collect data. Now, I don't have any evidence at this point that they've put arms, much less ballistic missiles in that location, but I don't put that out of the question long term. I think the Chinese, as you indicated, Chris, have been using what's called the Belt and Road Initiative to establish a footprint across the world. Arguably, in more than 100 countries have now bowed to the economic and the military prowess of the Chinese communists and have invited them in to invest in infrastructure, have invited their military in, and have established a foothold in many countries literally across the world. So this is of some significance. Cuba being perhaps the latest that we're talking about, but they control the Panama Canal, much of Latin America, certainly most of Africa, the Middle East, and their growing footprint throughout Asia. So this should disturb every American because China, as I say in my latest book, Kings of the East, has every intention of becoming the dominant world power. And, President Xi has made that clear in his own public statements, and his actions certainly reflect that outcome.
Well, and you sit and you see this. What can we do as a nation or as a people to try and reverse this course, or is it even possible?
No, I think it's possible, but we have to become pragmatic. Back in 2018, I wrote a book, Alliance of Evil, and I said we are in a new Cold War with Russia and China. China is, of course, the senior member here because of its power, its economy, and its reach. Russia, is still significant because it has the world's largest nuclear weapon inventory, and of course, it has a lot of energy, natural gas and oil. And then both countries have a great deal of influence across the world with a growing number of nations. So, if we want to get serious, we have to clamp down economically. We have to make sure that our supply chains are not tethered to China. We need to make sure our military is top notch and capable of countering the technologies that China and, of course, to a certain degree, Russia are tapping into. We've fallen behind in things like hypersonic missiles. We were ahead decades ago, and then we stopped the program totally. So pragmatically, we need to look at national security, which includes cyber, which includes espionage. We have to have a military that is capable. Our Navy is now second to China's. China's is rapidly moving toward 450 surface ships and submarines, and we're dwindling under 300 at the present time. So when you look across the board, no matter what area, we have really surrendered the leadership in so many critical areas to the Chinese. That I mentioned the book 2018, Alliance of Evil. I identified 16 critical nodes or situations that dictate why I think there's a new Cold War. And though that list is very relevant today, and I think, when I go through it, I look at, and I'm looking over at my list, diplomatic, ideological, espionage, abuse of trade and economic instruments, increasing defense budgets, building large, sophisticated militaries, and the list continues. Every one of those has been played out in spades by the Chinese. I don't think any rational person today, given what's going on with China and Russia, would dispute that this is a new type of Cold War, much like the Cold War that I lived through and you lived through during the period of the post World War II era all the way up to 1990. Everything is self-evident, and yet, until recently, there were so many skeptics in Washington and in Western capitals that they didn't think that we were in a new Cold War. Well, the facts are, I think, without a doubt, we are, and we need to wake up to that reality.
Well, and Bob, that brings me to another question because, I don't know how many, was it 30 something years you served in the military? How many years did you serve, sir?
Well, I had 24 active, but even to this very day, back in 2002, after I left the Family Research Council, I came back to the Pentagon, and so there's an additional 25 that I've continued to serve, but not in uniform. So, arguably, I have more than 50 years, 53 years this summer.
Yes, well, so I want to ask your opinion about our military readiness. I see these commercials on TV advertising the Navy almost reaching out to the trans community for recruits, the Army doing closely the same thing, and the mental preparedness of the men that are already there, this generation. Do you think that we are prepared as a national defense force to combat someone like China and or Russia?
Well, certainly we've compromised our ability to, focus on what's important for an armed forces, and that is to kill the enemy and break things. And anytime you're spending more time, doing things that are not key to that capability, then you're detracting from the overall readiness of the force. Now, keep in mind when the political people take over the Pentagon, they dictate new policies. They emphasize the things that their president wants them to emphasize. So, with Lloyd Austin as the Secretary of Defense, he and a cadre, a stable of people that have been appointed to positions that control the military, they dictate these, very damaging social agendas. I've
Yes.
seen this time and again. Certainly, when I last was in uniform, I was part of the task force that wrote the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy for the Clinton administration. And I saw internally how the appointees that Bill Clinton put in there were radically changing the focus of the military to be more pro-homosexual. I saw the same thing during the Obama administration when I was serving as a contractor in the Pentagon, that President Obama pushed women in direct ground combat and removed the important restrictions that we had in place that promoted readiness. And then, of course, under this administration, I've seen the whole transgender push and the other push against so-called white supremacy and so forth. We spend so much time on needless social engineering in the Pentagon. And then, of course, we waste so many funds on other things. And that doesn't even touch the what I consider the misdirection that we have with regard to Ukraine and the war there, as well
Yes.
as our emphasis on what the Chinese are doing and so forth. So there's so much poor leadership at the very top. And, I didn't see the same thing under Mr. Trump. Unfortunately, the advances we made under Mr. Trump were reversed very quickly by the radicals that Mr. Biden put in place.
Well, and I agree wholeheartedly with you on that. And so I used to sit and wonder, are these people really that ignorant? But isn't there a more nefarious um, agenda there in the background? Because elect these people, and they can't be that stupid. I just put it bluntly. So do you? And I know you've written that in some of your books, as far
Yeah, I,
as the agenda, the leftist communist agenda to take over this nation.
yeah, they're ideologues, Chris, and they are following a template that says this is what they want the United States to become, and weakening the armed forces is part and parcel to that agenda. Using the armed forces for their own social engineering outcomes is something that these people unapologetically push. So we need to recognize that yes, there is great evil in some administrations. There is great ambition to change the direction of the country. And it's, in my opinion, certainly not the direction that our forefathers would have had. And yes, the evil is very pervasive, and I've seen it up close and personal for many decades.
Well, I know that the Lord's led me in since about 2019 to pray for justice for this nation, and I believe that justice will come, and that's why I've named my ministry Psalms 89:14. Justice and judgment are the foundation of thy throne. Truth and mercy go before you. And so I think, we as a church, as believers, I think that's we need to get involved. We need to stand up. We need to speak out. We need to vote. That is so important. And but we need to get on I think this real battle is going to be on our knees. Uh, Bob, I want to thank you for your time. I did want to mention a few of your books. I know I've heard people, and I've also got your latest one that was published, Kings of the East, which is an awesome book. But you have a book coming out later this month, don't you?
Yeah, yes, I do, Chris. Divided we stand. And it really goes after the very essence of what's happening in the United States today. I don't think anyone that's observed what's happening culturally, politically, economically, and in terms of spiritual dimension, would deny that there's a great divide and maybe multiple divisions. I address that. I address much of what's happening in the political sphere, certainly in the cultural sphere, the religious sphere, and other areas. Historically, division has been the key instrument of Satan, and how he has created wars using division. He has divided the church using a variety of mechanisms. And I think there are a lot of powerful people today at very significant positions from the White House across the culture that are conduits or proxies of what Satan has in mind for not only today, but also, as I argue in my final chapter in Divided We Stand, in the end time. So I would encourage people, if you understand where we are perhaps theologically and prophetically today, you need to appreciate that this is a war by design, and the end times, I think, are rapidly coming to our forefront, and we need to be prepared for them.
I agree 100%. When I saw the title of that book, I thought when Jesus said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," and so I think that book is very timely. I appreciate your time. I'd like to give you a moment or two, if you'd like, to just, as a believer, as a Christian, share your heart or how you think people should prepare for this time, what they should do, get out and vote, speak up, just whatever's hard. Take a couple moments, and then we'll end the call.
Sure, Chris. I'm very open in terms of what I say in the media and my books. I'm an evangelical, and I believe that the only answer is through salvation through Jesus Christ. I do believe that we are approaching the prophetic end times, and I outline, in each of my books, how Christians ought to be prepared. As you know, Kings of the East, I talk about what's happening in communist China today to believers and how they're being, terribly abused, and how that government, which is Leninist Marxist, wants all people of faith to fall in line to the corrupt government and worship government. But that's what Marxists have wanted from the time of Karl Marx back in the 19th century. The Russian situation, of course, is tragic. I've spent time in both Russia and Ukraine, and I know that there are believers in Christ in places like Russia and Ukraine, and they're suffering tremendously. I do believe, however, that war was totally preventable, and yet we're right on the precipice of something that could become very, very damaging and evil in terms of a broader war, and it should have been prevented. And of course, the Biden administration, and I believe Mr. Biden is about as divisive, if not more divisive, than any other figure in the history of this nation. And unfortunately, every decision he seems to make it just wants to divide us even more so. And of course, I talk about that in Divided We Stand. So I think as believers, we need to be in prayer. We need to be in fellowship. We need to be beacons of light and salt in this culture. And if we do those things, it may not cause the Lord to tarry any longer, but it also will give us the comfort that we need to live for Christ in a really upside down culture today. So I thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to speak with you, and hopefully the people will awaken to the importance of living for Christ in this upside down culture.
Amen. I couldn't have said it better myself. Bob, I appreciate you. How can people get to your books? And I don't know if you've got any blogs or any writings out there. How can they get to you or get your books out there?
Well, certainly, Chris, they can go, Amazon, has all the books. Every, the Walmarts of the world, the Barnes and Nobles, others, it's all over. All you have to do is type in my name in the internet and you can see where you can buy them. And, of course, I have a Facebook page, a public Facebook page in which I share some of my insights as the days go along. Right now, I'm associated with, of course, Defender Publishing, Skywatch, and even the Family Research Council. I'm a senior fellow, and I work with a number of other media outlets. So I have, a fairly large outreach through the various mechanisms. So I thank you for asking.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you, Lieutenant Robert McGinnis, or Lieutenant Colonel, excuse me. Appreciate your time. It was very insightful, and thank you very much. And I hope possibly we can do this again in the future.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Have a great day.
All right, you too, sir. Thank you.
Divine justice coming down, coming down. It's divine justice coming down.